بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي وكفى الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, this is the reading of Iqmal al-Shiyam of Hazrat of lots of Mashayikh. Iqmal al-Shiyam was actually the commentary of Ibn Atawla Iskandari Rahmatullah Alayhi's Al-Hikam. And as mentioned previously, that the original book was written in Arabic, the Hikam of Ibn Atawla, and Sheikh Ali Muttaqi Rahmatullah Alayh did the tabweeb of it. He gave it a certain order, which was then under the instructions of Haji Imdadullah Muhajir Makki Rahmatullah Alayh, translated into Urdu by Hazrat Saharanpuri. And then Hazrat Thanvi Rahmatullah Alayh asked Hazrat Moulana Abdullah Gangohi Rahmatullah Alayh, a Khalifa of Hazrat Saharanpuri Rahmatullah Alayh, to then write a commentary. And thereafter, the Shaykh Rahmatullah Alayh wrote the introduction. And we've been going over the introduction, which is very long, about 80 pages. We've been going over the introduction for some time now, bit by bit, and we also cover the hikam. So that's the background story behind that. So carrying on with Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullah Alayh's introduction, Hazrat Shaykh writes, and he's speaking about the second Hajj of Hazrat Saharanpuri Rahmatullah Alayh. He says his third and subsequent Hajj were undertaken for Saharanpur, and the third Hajj was after the heart-rending demise of Moulana Gangohi Rahmatullah Alayh in approximately 1905. And he went there to console himself. His fourth Hajj was in 1910, and in that year, Shah Abdul Rahim Raipuri was one of the great Khalifas of the Shaykh Rahmatullah, Hazrat Gangohi Rahmatullah Alayh went for Hajj with a large group of murids and companions. And Hazrat Saharanpuri also went with him as far as Delhi to see him off. On his return back, Shah Zaid Hussain, the head of the village of Bahad, he asked Moulana Saharanpuri to also go for Hajj. He said he'll pay for him. On his insistence, Hazrat Saharanpuri Rahmatullah Alayh, he was feeling amiss that Moulana Raipur Rahmatullah Alayh is going. So he also then accepted the offer after much pressure, and he left Saharanpur for Makkah to Mukarramah. And then he went to Medina Munawwara, and he stayed 22 days there. And the fifth Hajj was the Hajj, and this is a very interesting episode here. The fifth Hajj was that contentious journey which took place in Shawwal of 1914 in the company of Shaykh al-Hind, Moulana Mahmud Hassan Rahmatullah Alayh. Anyone who's read the life story of the ulama of India, ulama of Deoband, and their efforts for the liberation of India from colonial rule will know about the silk handkerchiefs movement, and within which Hazrat Shaykh al-Hind Rahmatullah Alayh, with the mashwara of the Mashayikh, embarked on a plan which wasn't successful, and there's a lot more depth into it, but a person should read in order to understand some of this, what happened there. There's a book, The Silk Handkerchief Movement, and the Asiran in Malta, or the Prisoners of Malta, which goes into explaining exactly what took place. And the idea was that there would be an insurrection from the Sarhad area of India in order to overthrow the colonial authorities at that time. And Hijaz at that time was under the Ottomans, and there was the three pashas, Talat Pasha, I forgot the other two's names, and the idea was in order to get some supportive letters from them. But when they got there, what happened was there was also something else brewing at the same time, and there was an insurrection taking place in the Hijaz, the Arab revolt led by Lawrence of Arabia. Hazrat Shaykh al-Hind Rahmatullah Alayh was then imprisoned and taken to Malta, and that's a long story in itself, but I won't go into too much detail about that. Anyway, so the fifth Hajj was that contentious journey which took place in Shawwal 1914 in the company of Shaykh al-Hind, just before the eve of First World War. And Moulana Saharanpuri did not obtain the companionship of Shaykh al-Hind from the beginning of the journey. However, a week before the journey, four illustrious personalities, Hazrat Saharanpuri, Shaykh al-Hind, Moulana Mahmud Hassan Rahmatullah Alayh, and Moulana Abdul Rahim Raipuri. So there's Moulana Abdul Aziz Raipuri, who was his Khalifa. The first was Moulana Abdul Rahim Raipuri, and also Moulana Haj Hakim Ahmed Rampuri, gathered for secret discussions in the library of Mazahir Room. No one else besides these four were allowed to participate in the talks. After the Ishraq prayers, each day they would go into privacy, and at midday, word would be repeatedly come from the home of Moulana Saharanpuri announcing that meals were ready, and they would reply, "We are coming." They would descend from upstairs just before the adhan of the Zohar prayer, and after quickly eating would perform their prayers, and then immediately seclude themselves to continue talks until after the adhan of the Asr prayer. After Asr, there would be no gathering where religious instructions would be given, and they would have However, sometimes we had such a gathering after Maghrib prayer. Everyone was curious to know what was happening and what was being said during these lengthy and secret talks which lasted for a whole week, but nobody had any idea. At the time I was a child and would ask all my seniors about these talks, and my father had some inkling what these discussions were about, and made some allusions which would satisfy my curiosity. And this journey, which was decided in those lengthy consultations, took place in 1914, and during the absence of Shaykh al-Hind, the responsibility of his duties was assumed by Moulana Raipuri. Although these personalities held high aspirations, fate did not permit their attainment. On account of the excess and oppression of Sharif Hussain of Makkah, Moulana Saharanpuri Rahmatullah was compelled to return before the Hajj in 1915, while Shaykh al-Hind was then imprisoned in Malta. Although it's mentioned in Tazkiratul Khalid, the biography of Hazrat Saharanpuri returned from his journey in Shaban. He in fact departed from Makkah Mukarramah at the end of Shawwal, and his ship reached Bombay on 8th Dhul-Qa'dah. And as he alighted from the ship, he was handed a telegram announcing the demise of my honourable father, Moulana Yahya Sahib. And this news aggravated the grief he suffered as a result of the difficult events that transpired during the year he was resident in Makkah Mukarramah. For an entire year, he faced anxiety and difficult events in the Hijaz. And after he received this telegram informing of this major loss, we heard that he fell silent for a short while. And to compound all of this, he disembarked from the ship in Bombay and was taken into custody along with his respected wife and brother, Haji Maqbul Ahmad, who was like his right-hand man. And together with their luggage, the three were taken to North India to Nainital, where there is a prison. And the whole story is quite long. They were interrogated for several days, after which, through the favour of Allah Almighty, they were eventually freed. His sixth Hajj took place in 1914. He left Saharanpur on 2nd Shaban. And this Sunnah, and as the Shaykh Rahmatullah also says that he also accompanied him on this journey. And there was some delay in finding a ship in Bombay because Saharanpuri's retinue consisted of approximately 300 people, and he disliked travelling ahead without all of them. So he carries on, then he went to Makkah Mukarramah. And then he says that in spite of Moulana Saharanpuri's weakness and old age and the dizziness he felt as a result of the ship's motions, he himself led the Tarawih prayer standing. He would recite half a chapter in 8 units of prayer, and I would lead the remaining 12 units reciting at 3/4 of a chapter. On reaching Makkah, Moulana Saharanpuri offered the Tarawih prayers behind an excellent reciter who would recite 2 parts a night from the beginning of the Quran and complete his own Quran in Nafal prayers. On reaching Makkah Mukarramah, Moulana Muhibbuddin Wilayati, who was amongst the Khalifas of Haji Abdullah Rahmatullah alayh, and a man of great inspiration, said the following while embracing Moulana Saharanpuri: Moulana, how come you have come here? The day of judgment is about to be enacted here. Return to India immediately after Ramadan. So Moulana Saharanpuri told us, my intention to take up residence in Medina Tayyibah, but Moulana Muhibbuddin, who was the Khalifa of Haji Abdullah Rahmatullah, lived in Makkah Mukarramah. He forbids this. I've already visited Medina several times. This is your first Hajj. It's not known if you'll gain this opportunity. You proceed to Medina to Munawwara. Inshallah, we'll carry on from there further on. But it's a beautiful story. I mean, as a Shaykh Rahmatullah alayh, he goes into a lot of detail explaining things. So it's more than an introduction, it's a book in itself. But he then explains how Hazrat Saharanpuri went to Medina Munawwara, and he stayed in Makkah to Mukarramah. As Shaykh Rahmatullah went to Medina Munawwara, his entire journey at that time by camel, and how they got there, how long they stayed there, and what exactly happened. It continues, but inshallah we'll pause there because it's quite a long, lengthy discussion. The actual kitab in itself, Ikmalul Shiyam, perfection of morals. As Shaykh Rahmatullah alayhi used to tell his murids, especially those that do dhikr, that it's important to read this book from beginning to end repeatedly. This book along with Irshadul Muluk, specifically for those people who do dhikr at the same time. That is part of their tarbiyat. Now moving on to the actual book, we decided that we'll read the Urdu rather than the English translation, so that we get some barakat from the words of Hazrat Saharanpuri Rahmatullah alayhi, that will then translate into English as we go along. So the chapter that we're on is about ikhlas and sincerity. As Hazrat Ibn Ataullah Iskandari Rahmatullah alayhi, he mentions aphorism. He says, Jis cheez ko tu mahboob banayega, uska banda hoga. He says that thing that you make beloved, you will become his slave. Allah Ta'ala usko pasand nahi karta. Allah Almighty doesn't like this. Ke uske siwa tu kisi ka banda bane. That you become a slave for something apart from him. That's the aphorism, the commentary, faida, very simple. Allah Ta'ala के सिवा दुनिया की चीज़ों में से जिससे आदमी को मोहब्बत हो तो गोया उसका बंदा बन गया. That anyone, the insan, the admi, the person, when he has love for something aside from Allah Almighty inside the world, then it's as if he's become a slave to that thing. इसलिए कि जिस शय से मोहब्बत होगी उससे इलाका शदीद होगा. Why? Because the thing that which you have love for, you'll have an extreme connection to it. उसके अलाइदा होने से दिल को सदमा पहुंचेगा. By separating yourself from it, then you will feel some sort of remorse in the heart. और यही मतलब है बंदा बनने का. And this is the meaning of becoming a slave in this context. जैसे बाज़ लोग बंदा ज़र बने हुए हैं. In the same way that some people have become slaves of gold or wealth or money or cause. बाज़ बंदा ज़ौजा में, बाज़ बंदा औलाद में. Some people have become slaves to their wives. Extreme love for their wives to an extent that that's everything that they have. Some people become slave to their children and only their children. लेकिन ये याद रखना चाहिए, a person should remember कि इस मोहब्बत से मुराद वही मोहब्बत है. But you know, love is natural, it comes naturally to people. You do have love, but what does it mean, love here? What does the love actually mean? And he explains, he says, लेकिन याद रखना चाहिए, a person should remember कि मोहब्बत से मुराद, when it means love, the love that is meant here, के बस इसी का हो रहा है, that you love something to an extent that you're completely and solely dedicated to it. और उस महबूब के मुकाबले में शरीयत के अहकाम का भी परवाह न करे. And in contrast or in opposition to the love of that particular thing, you don't even regard anything for the shariat. So for example, you can have love for wealth to an extent, but if your love is such that you override the rulings of shariat, then there's a problem here. You can have love for your children, but if the love is such that you override the hukam of shariat, or love for your wife is such that you override the hukam of shariat, then there's a problem with that love. But love in itself is something that a person cannot control. You will have love for things. It's inside you, it's inherent inside you, but it has to be channeled and funneled in the correct way. अगर शरीयत के अहकाम को मुकद्दम रखता है, if a person keeps the rulings of shariat first, he gives primacy, he gives preference to the rulings of shariat, और तभी मोहब्बत औलाद और अकारिब के साथ है, and he has natural love for his children and his relatives, ये मोहब्बत ममनू नहीं बल्कि सुन्नत है. That type of love is not forbidden, but that type of love is sunnat. So going back, what does he say? Ibn Atullah, it's very simple. This चीज़ को तू महबूब बनाएगा, that thing that you make beloved, तो उसका बंदा होगा, you become slave to it. And the muhabbat here is that muhabbat where you become so dedicated to it that you override shariat. और अल्लाह ताला को उसको पसंद नहीं करता. अल्लाह ताला doesn't like, he doesn't prefer कि उसके सिवा तू किसी का बंदा बने, that you become completely dedicated to something aside from him Almighty. Next one, मुहिब वो नहीं है जो अपने महबूब से इवज़ का उम्मीदवार हो. He said the beloved, the lover is not that one who has some sort of hope of a recompensation, something in exchange from the beloved. When you love someone, then your love is infinite. Your love is without any strings, without any attachments. You don't hope and wish for any reward or anything in exchange. या हुसूल गरज का तलबगार हो, nor is that love such that you want some sort of purpose in order to, you're only loving something in order to achieve something. Once that is finished, then khalas, you can take your way and I take my way. So for example, sometimes you hear about women, they might be in love with a man, but it's really in fact they're only loving the wealth. When the wealth goes, she walks her way and he goes his way. Yeah. So that's not the type of love. Love, actual love, hakiki ishq is that you completely devoted, and whether there's something in exchange or not doesn't matter. क्योंकि मुहिब हकीकी वो है जो अपने महबूब की रज़ा में सब खर्च कर डाले. Why? Because the true lover is that one that spends everything in order to please his beloved. वो मुहिब हकीकी नहीं जिसके लिए महबूब कुछ खर्च करे. The real lover is not that one that spends something for the beloved. But that's it. If you love Allah Almighty, then you spend everything for Him. You don't wait for anything to come in exchange. You know, people say, you know, they say that the mashayikh say that the real mashayikh and the real Sufi is he who worships Allah because he is deserving of worship, not because you're going to get something in recompense. When it comes to the Ami Admi, he'll say, you know, itkum minan nar, save us from Jahannam, give us Jannat. Okay, that comes with, that's part and parcel. But the thing is, the real worshipper, the real marif, the person, arif is he who worships Allah solely for the sake of Allah, nothing in exchange. Faida, commentary. जानना चाहिए, a person should know कि महबूबी हकीकी सब बंदों का हक ताला है. That the real महबूब, the real beloved for every single slave is Allah Almighty. और बंदे मोमिन उसके मुहिब, and the slave is the believing slave is actually his lover. Chunanche irshad hai, because of this Allah Almighty says in the Quran Kareem, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ, that those that bring faith, those who are in faith, أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ, they have great love for Allah Almighty. Yani jo log iman laye, those people are bring faith, वो Allah की मोहब्बत में बहुत ज़्यादा सख्त है, the extreme inside the love of Allah Almighty. बस जो बंदा ताअत करके उस पर किसी एवज़ का उम्मीदवार हो. So the slave, the person, the human, when he worships and he provides some sort of obedience to Allah Almighty, and then he wishes something in exchange from Allah Almighty, in exchange for that, Jannat ka ya zauq halawat wa asar ma'arif वगैरह का, or so for example he wants Jannat, or he wants some sort of spiritual state, or he wants some sort of like ecstasy, or some extreme feeling, or some sort of experience, a spiritual experience, etc. वो सच्चा मुहिब नहीं, he's not a true beloved. He's not a true lover. इसलिए कि मुहिब महबूब से किसी चीज़ का सिवा उसकी रज़ामंदी के तालिब नहीं होता. Why? Because the muhib, the person who loves, he does not wish for anything from the beloved except for his pleasure. यानी अल्लाह मेरे से राज़ी हो जाए ना, Allah becomes happy with me. बल्कि मुहिब तो जो कुछ उसके पास तन मन धन है सब कुछ महबूब के ऊपर कुर्बान कर देता है. Rather, the lover, whatever he has in terms of body, soul and wealth, he spends and sacrifices everything for the beloved. महबूब से किसी चीज़ की ख्वाहिश नहीं होती, and he has no desire for anything from the beloved. The next aphorism he says, इसके सदके किए हुए अमल पर तो क्यों कर इवज़ का तालिब हो सकता है. That when the slave, yeah, when the action that he's done, right, is actually a charity from Allah Almighty, that he's giving you the tawfiq to do an action. How can, when he's given you the tawfiq, the sadaqah and the charity to carry out an action, how can you even seek something in compensation from Allah Almighty, a reward? या उसकी तोहफा भेजी हुई रास्ते पर किस तरह जज़ा का तालिब हो सकता है. When Allah Almighty has sent to you a gift to be on the straight path and to carry out a pious action, how can you seek a reward from Allah Almighty? Commentary. बदला उस काम का होता है, that the exchange, the compensation is for that work, कि वो काम तुमने दूसरे के नफ़ा के वास्ते किया हो, that you carried out an action for the benefit of another person. So maybe you might have built a wall for somebody in order to benefit them, और अपना उसमें कुछ नफ़ा no, there's no interest for you to build that wall, you only did it for him. Yeah, ऐसे काम की उज्रत और बदला दूसरे से लिया जाता है. In that scenario, you can take some sort of compensation or reward from the other person. और बंदा जो कुछ अमल करता है, whatever action the slave carries out, उसमें नफ़ा बंदा का है. The benefit for the slave in that is for the slave. किसी सूरत, so when a person carries out an action of servitude to Allah Almighty, he's not benefiting Allah Almighty, he's benefiting himself, and he's got a tawfiq from Allah Almighty. किसी सूरत से मौला करीम का नहीं, there's no way that he's actually benefiting Allah Almighty, he's only benefiting himself. कि वो उससे और उसके नफ़ा से बिल्कुल मुस्तगनी है. Why? Because Allah Almighty is completely free from want. He's free from want, from the benefit for himself and उससे और उसके नफ़ा, and the benefit for himself and from the benefit from the worship. He doesn't need anything. बिल्कुल मुस्तगनी है. He's completely free from want. बस बंदा का अमल और रास्ती व इखलास मौला करीम से बंदा पर सदका और तोहफा है. Hence, when you think about it like this, you've changed your mindset and you think that Allah Almighty doesn't need any of this, then you realize that the action that the slave has carried out, then for him to come onto the correct path, for him to have sincerity for Allah Almighty, then this is a gift from Allah Almighty that He's bestowed upon you. बस निहायत अजीब व हमाकत और बेअक्ली है. And then he says that when this is the scenario, then it's extremely strange, it's extremely silly and foolish, and it's extremely senseless to think कि उसके सदका और तोहफा पर उसी से बदला और इवज़ का तालिब बने. That he thinks or he seeks some sort of reward or an exchange for that gift that Allah Almighty has given to you. Yeah, ये कैसे हो सकता है? How? And then he says rhetorically, how can this be कि फ़कीर को किसी करीम ने जो सदका या तोहफा दिया, that the poverty-stricken one, when a generous person gives him some sort of charity or a gift, वो फ़कीर उसी से उल्टा उस सदका और तोहफा के इवज़ करता है, then the फ़कीर takes it, and the poor man takes it, and then he turns around and says, oh, I've taken your gift, now give me something in exchange. Yeah, because we're the one that's fakir, we're the one that's poor, we're the one that's in need of Allah Almighty. Allah Almighty doesn't need us, and that's why our line of sight at all times should be on pleasing Allah Almighty. If we're focusing on pleasing Allah Almighty, then things become better. So that's the end of the chapter on Ikhlas, which was quite a long chapter, a beautiful chapter about sincerity. The next chapter is the fourth chapter on prayer, namaz. Do we carry on one more, or shall we start Dhikr? What time is Asr in Salam? Isha, sorry. 20 past. So we'll start Dhikr then, inshallah. Inshallah, we'll carry on next week. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.